Welcome to Legacy Therapy, the podcast that will teach you, in bite-sized chunks, how to leave a stress-free legacy so loved ones can focus on people, not paperwork, when you become ill or pass away. Here is your host and financial advocate, Stacey Golden-Lisnock.
Welcome to the 17th episode of Legacy Therapy, Planning Techniques for a Stress-Free Legacy. This is Stacey Golden-Lisnock, your financial advocate. And we have another session today, which we'll be learning some really important things regarding the loss of pets. I have a good friend of mine on today, Nancy Gordon. And just to tell you a little bit about Nancy, she's specializing in navigating anticipatory grief, human and pet loss, and transforming the grief that follows. Nancy is passionate about helping pet parents in process of making the gut-wrenching decision to lifting up instead of putting down your pet by creating and carrying out a beautiful healing plan that eases the trauma of parting for both pet parents and their pets. She is a transformational loss and grief specialist dealing with both human and pet loss. And I want to mention at the outset here that she does have a documentary that Animal Planet did on her and her service dog Toaster. So you can watch that, and she'll be telling you a little bit about that. You can get it from her website. So without further ado, welcome, Nancy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I've been looking forward to our chat because I'm the new mommy of a Min Pin. So she just turned a year old, and we're just like so in love with this little dog. And I said, it's so different when you're not raising kids when you have a pet, because when we were raising kids and we always had pets, I never had that kind of time to devote to the pet. It was just sort of like, take him for a walk and let him out and feed him and pick up the poop. Yeah. Now it's a whole different story. So I want to hear your story, because yours is even more of a love story with the animals, and it's super the grief of losing your animal is just as deep as losing a person on some level. So take it away.
It certainly is. Well, I had a car accident, which I ended up on disability as a result of. And about a year after I closed my private practice as a psychotherapist, I discovered this rare breed dog called the Mexican hairless. And I, at that time, was using a heating pad, like a microwave heating pad, 24/7. And I learned about this breed from the Ancient Aztecs that went back about 3,500 years ago, who were used as spiritual mystical healing dogs, and especially for the heat that emanated from their hairless bodies when they were placed on your skin. So when I discovered this, I decided to get one of these toy-sized dogs, put her around my neck, and call her Toaster. And I got rid of my 24/7 microwave neck wrap. So she became my 24/7 no microwave hot dog. And then she really kind of transformed my whole experience and path about losing my whole life as I knew it as a result of this car accident, and then reinventing another pathway in which I could continue to help other people just differently. So Animal Planet, when Toaster was about 3, she had a litter, and they'd learned about my use of her and the history with the Xolos. And so they filmed her pregnancy and her whelping. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I got a chance to watch it. It was very good. If the listeners have a chance, and even if they can't remember exactly, I think I Googled Animal Planet. I think I might have said Toaster or something, and it came up. It was really easy to find. Yeah.
Right. Yes. It was so easy to find that it aired so often for so many years that I got so inundated with emails from people all over the world asking for my help to help them find a little toaster of their own. And so I ended up starting a nonprofit called Xolos for Chronic Pain Relief, which is their breed name, Xolos. And I placed 18 dogs, 18 Xolos with people with chronic pain over many years.
Nice. Is that still something you're actively doing or?
I still have the nonprofit. I'm not actively placing dogs anymore. I'm using the nonprofit more for education
Mm-hmm. Okay.
training.
Yeah. Well, my little min pin, she's butts up against me and she is so hot. I always think of Toaster because like she makes me so hot.
Yes, yes. A lot of dogs can emanate that heat. This
Mm,
particular breed was hairless, so it was really pronounced,
yeah.
the heat factor and the heat benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, dogs, especially their bellies can be pretty toasty.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Yeah. So I saw a picture of it. And so she actually just you taught her how to just come and be like a wrap around your neck in the
Yeah,
car and everything, I think I saw.
yes.
Mhm.
It was her favorite place to be and her safe place. So it was actually before I even got her, I had the person who was taking care of the litter
Mhm.
start. Um, she just instantly did it. I mean, it's like she knew her purpose and she loved her purpose. This was her way of being of service. And most dogs really, really like to have a sense of purpose.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. So then you went on to breed her, I understand.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, she was bred, and that's what Animal Planet filmed
Hmm.
is her pregnancy and her whelping. And then one of her puppies, she had four. One of her puppies had a bad knee, uh, discovered at 6 weeks old, and she ended up um, staying with me. And unfortunately, after a surgery to repair the knee, she broke her knee, and
Mm.
and became it became a situation where she had to lose her leg. So I had to agree to an amputation of her hind leg. But then, so her name was Pink. Pink, she really, in many different ways, and Toaster, they both helped me sort of reinvent myself and learn a lot of different ways um, to heal on many levels, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, not just their physical comfort. And when Pink became a three-legged dog, she she was amazing. It was amazing to watch how quickly she adapted and how she just changed her whole identity and was still a very joyful dog. So she really got me off the couch out of depression and taught me to like do what I used to do just differently. And I wrote her book, her story, her true story, in a children's book called Pink, the Three-Legged Dog Who Lost Her Leg and Found Her Courage.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. Really great. And I know you had a career as a
Psychotherapist.
psychotherapist. Okay, so now you've kind of taken that same training and it's about grief and
Yes, well, really, my whole work since I ever, started my practice in the early '80s was about fundamentally about loss. Everything, whether it was a divorce or whether it was, being an adult child of an alcoholic, the loss of the parenting, for example, in some of those situations, or chronic illness and disability. Everything really comes back to loss. We can't escape it. In fact, we're actually born through it. Our first experience of loss is being born and kicked out of the womb, and there we are, our first loss, and then it goes on from there. So really, what I what I find is most helpful for people is to really, for whatever challenge they're dealing with, to really be able to go through loss and heal the grief that follows. That's where really resolution for whatever situation it is comes from.
yeah, so in what the work that I'm doing in helping people to set up a stress-free legacy and techniques for that, a lot one section for sure revolves around pets. and the fact that people are a little, I don't know what the word is, but they're not taking the fact that their pet needs a place to go like instantly if they should have an accident or they become ill and can't care for the pet any longer, or they should pass away. And I was reading up a little bit where it mentioned that sometimes people are so attached to their pets that they won't even put themselves first, and that they won't go to the hospital or go to a rehab center or go to even a shelter for victims of domestic abuse or something, for fear that they'll be leaving the animal behind. So we have kind of like both extremes of people that won't even care for themselves and stay with their pet, and then you have the rest of us that haven't made arrangements for our pet if something should happen to us, and we never know when that will be. So what I'm really recommending people do is they have those conversations with somebody. We've already talked to our daughter, said, hey, because Coco's our dog, that Min Pin I was mentioning. It's like, if something happens to us, will you take Coco? And
That's
she's
right.
like, yeah. So that's a very informal way, but I know there's more formal ways around it. But if you could speak a little bit to what I mentioned about like there's a whole range from I'm not going to leave my pet and I'll actually sacrifice my own health, to something happens to me now my dog or cat or whatever's animal's fate is sort of left up in the air to whomever might step up, or in most cases, I don't think people know, they end up in the shelters, and many don't make it out of the shelters because they're on almost all accounts they're older pets. They're not as cute as little puppies, and
Mhm.
there's just not the homes for them. So if you talk on that a little bit.
Yes, I think it's wonderful that you're incorporating that in the services and courses that you're providing, because it is a um, an experience for both the animal and the family, and whoever ends up maybe taking care of the pet. It's so critical for the healing process to begin before the end really happens, and it's much less traumatic. Even though some people have a hard time facing the loss, or doing facing the planning. I'm sure you come across that with people. They're just maybe resistant to like even dealing with it. And again, that goes back to, as a culture, we are are just in the infancy stage, really, of acknowledging grief
Right.
and learning to, deal with it and help people through it. So the natural, response is to deny that it's even there, that it's even a possibility. And as you point out, that in situations where you have, let's say, a senior who has had an animal with them for many, many years, and they go before the animal, which is, does happen. It's more likely that the animals go before us, but they still go, sometimes the humans still go first. And I've encountered people who have not made any plan. The death is sudden, or maybe it's even expected, but no plan was made for the animal. This could be a single person,
Mhm.
elderly person who passes on, and then there's no family to take the pet. There's no daughter like you have to even ask to
Right.
take the pet, and no plan. And I know from several people who work with seniors professionally as care managers, they've ended up having to take the pet
Mm.
at
Mm.
times.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important, and it's really not so hard to do it, to make a plan and just to acknowledge, okay, if this happens, who's gonna take.
Yeah, so I even in just some research found that if you don't have somebody in your circle that actually can, because sometimes they already have enough animals, or they have animals that won't tolerate other animals. I mean, there's so many, or they can't have them where they live or whatever.
Mhm,
Somebody's allergic. There's so many barriers to entry, you might say, for like somebody else's animal to come live with you.
mhm,
There are, I guess they're, I don't know if they're for profit or not profit, but you actually make arrangements in advance for
mhm.
them to take your animal. And of course, you do pay. for them to do that. And so it's a way, it's almost like I guess it's like a foster system in a way, right? But they're never going to leave. They keep them and care for them like an orphanage, I guess.
Yes.
Mhm.
And most people don't know that, Stacey. So it's wonderful that you'll be sharing that, resource for people to help make it easier for them to make a decision way ahead of time.
Yeah.
If they don't have family.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, so these pets, I mean, I've even heard of where the pets have a broken heart, like the pets go through a depression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had to lift up both Toaster and her daughter Pink within 9 months of each other. Toaster was 17 years old, and Pink was 14 years old.
Mm.
And they had a mother-daughter bond that was just amazing, as you can imagine. Pink just loved her mother Toaster fiercely, and Toaster, just smiled at her all the time. You could see it. And so when I had to lift Toaster up first, Pink went into a depression. We both did. I got pneumonia for 3 weeks, and Pink and I stayed in bed, grieving. That's,
Mm.
what ended up happening for me. It's like I was just so overcome with grief, my immune system went down the rabbit hole. But I watched Pink. At first she was not even really as happy with me herself. She was kind of more aloof and isolating herself a little bit, and then gradually that got better. But animals do go through grief.
Yeah.
And especially if they're litter mates or related, like Toaster and Pink were, even more so sometimes.
Yeah. Wow. So what can you recommend? Like what are some of the things that you teach people around the grief and even for the human side of things? I mean, there's probably a few things you could
Yes,
impart.
well, I think I was just working with somebody yesterday, actually, who um, has a cat that has become just very, debilitated, dementia, um, and an angry fighter with her other cat. And the situation has just gotten really unwieldy, and nobody is happy in that household. And so she was working with me about, what to do, because she said, her cat is still eating, you know, she doesn't look like she's on her deathbed, and yet she's suffering. And I said to her, quality of life is a part of the decision making process for everyone. Um, and it really helped her to realize that her other cat was suffering because the one cat who was really, pretty ill on many different levels. Um, and she was suffering because the cat was howling through the night. They weren't getting sleep. This has been going on for a long time. And it kind of helped her realize that her hanging on to her cat when there was an opportunity to really look at the quality of life, and the cat was really not happy. The cat was suffering. And so I suggested that she make a plan, and she make it into some sort of, ritual, whatever that meant to her, a process, maybe even talking to the animal, to her cat, and then feeling like there's more closure. I think that's a big piece of what brings healing before the passing happens. Whether it's natural passing or it's euthanasia with a pet. But closure is one of the most important pieces to healing. And if you can accomplish that, um, saying goodbye in whatever ways that looks like, uh, it really eases the grief.
Yeah, because the grief can be so debilitating too. Like, right? I always thought of losing a child is like the worst possible thing, but it could also debilitate you into not being able to function in a normal way. So that's why as like a life insurance agent, when I was doing that, I was like, you really should have your kids insured. And people were looking at, well, I don't want to make, if my child died, I don't want to like make money on them. And I'm saying, this might be the only way you can pay your bills, because you may be unable to, especially if you're in a very technical, or like if you're a surgeon or something like that, like you're going to go into surgery with like this
Deep grief.
Yeah, deep grief, right?
Yes, and grief, has a mind and heart of its own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never the same for everyone, and it's not even the same for the same person with different losses. You could lose your mother, which is a different experience than losing your father, and the grief, takes on a whole different life, and the timing of it, the process of it, and how much it affects or derails you is, it's all dependent on every particular loss, which is why having a receptivity and understanding of the importance of doing the grief work really allows you to then navigate all different kind of experiences that we all go through at one point or another in our life around loss.
Yeah, I could see that. And especially like in living, the whole idea of my purpose here is to like help people to find techniques to leaving a stress-free legacy. And I mean, even to the point of having somebody in line to take a pet would eliminate that stress on whomever is in charge of all your other things that they're having to take care of, right? So not only your medical decisions, but I mean, it could happen where like your animal gets out because people don't realize they left the door open because they're not, they're not, right. That's not their house, and they're not really realizing the cat or the dog could have got out. So many things can happen,
Right.
that I think it could just compound on the people left behind to handle things. So
Yes.
as far as that goes, have you, I mean, I know this is a whole specialty thing, but as far as like when people arrange for their pet to be cared for by someone else, any kind of specific kinds of ways, or do you think just a verbal agreement is sufficient?
Well, no, I think what you just tapped in on is the nuances, the variables that maybe the owner knows, but the new owner is not going to know. And so preparing the for that event to happen, where the owner may know certain things, like, my cat, likes this kind of food and doesn't like this kind of food, and just whatever their routines are, is very helpful to help the pet, navigate that really big change of losing their owner and going into having to establish a new relationship, perhaps with a family member that lives in another state that they don't even know. So yes, the more that they can explain, this is how my cat and I live together, my dog and I live together, or these are the things to look out for. My dog is starting to have back problems, and kind of a heads up on what to look for medically, or acknowledge whatever's going on.
Yeah. So like a pet care plan,
Yeah.
and written out in advance. Yeah. And then kind of reviewed like once a year or something, which is what I'm advocating for the whole process. Is like you get it done once, and it's not like it's totally done forever. You have to revisit it because things do change.
Everything changes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful instruction.
So tell us a little bit about the works that you're doing now. The book you mentioned. Um, I don't think I said the title when we first started, but if you can go through that again.
Certainly. My work, as a result of all that I went through with my own recovery from that car accident, and I ended up closing my business. So that was, a whole new experience in my life of not having a purpose. And I've known my purpose has always been to help other people. So the journey that I went on, especially with Pink and watching how she dealt with her disability, I really kind of honed into what I consider 7 practices that I did consistently for whatever challenge I was facing. that worked consistently. So I began writing about that, and I now um am publishing a book called From Hurting to Healing, Pet Loss, or From Hurting to Healing from Chronic Illness or Disability, for example. And the subtitle is 7 Powerful Practices to Manage Your Mind and Heal Your Heart. Because that's really the heart of my work, is a lot of a lot of healing takes place on an emotional level, a mental level, and a spiritual level. And when I was going through my own recovery after the accident, that was the piece, the missing piece in the medical model. There was no really roadmap of how to um, resolve, heal on those levels when your problem is physical, and especially when your problem, like mine, was invisible. So my chronic pain, which was fibromyalgia, um, there nothing addressed that, and that's what started me on the path of helping other people figure that piece out too.
Yeah, when you realize how powerful like the mind is, when you've been a student of that, so it's pretty obvious to you that you can take what you've already learned and make it relatable, right, to something that you've also gone through, so that you're super valuable in helping other people. They don't have to take quite so long to get on the road to recovery, because it's possible, even though when you're in it, right, it might not feel possible.
Well, yes. Originally, my title for the book was 7 Steps of Hope and Healing, because that's what, when I was going through it, that's really what I found was missing, was the hope. You know, you have a chronic condition that renders you debilitated. It's very hard to live your life on a daily basis dealing with that, and dealing with the unpredictability of it, and of symptoms in some cases. It's true with mine. And so hope is a really, really important factor. And I changed the title because really um, the the hope comes out of managing your mind, using your mind to look at things differently, to see the glass half full. I have a comic that I got permission to use um, for the book, which is a scene in where there's a two-legged human, obviously two-legged human, standing looking at this three-legged dog, and there's a thought bubble. So the thought bubble above the human is, oh, he only has 3 legs. And the thought bubble over the dog is, oh, she only has 2 legs.
Yeah,
And that kind of sums it up. Really, it's how you look at it.
that's right.
It's how you look at it. So managing your mind and reframing your mindset is a really, really valuable way to grow through all these challenges instead of just suffer through them or survive them.
Right.
And healing your heart, then, of course, is the emotional and spiritual work.
Right. And the whole thing in my, from my perspective of getting people motivated to do the work ahead of time and plan for like what really is going to be the inevitable for every one of us, is changing your mindset around it, right? Because in the early days when I was started doing life insurance and I was only in my 20s, people were afraid to talk about it. They felt like if they discussed it, it would happen.
Yes.
And I just thought, wow, that's so superstitious, but it's kind of like doesn't follow, because if that's the case, then we should be having all of these other things happen that we focus on that don't happen either. We spend a lot of time worrying about things that never happen, never come to be. So it's all about actually being trained by somebody like you who knows better and can say, look, don't spend your time down here, you know, kind of rise above it, and you'll see there's a whole nother perspective that really serves you much better.
Yes, absolutely. And I think dealing, helping people deal with loss, with facing loss, and realizing that not only does it feel better, but you actually discover many, many gifts and blessings that loss brings. And so then you can turn it into a positive experience instead of a traumatic experience that you have to kind of suppress or drink wine over, or,
Yeah.
lots of different ways that people
Yeah.
handle not dealing with feelings.
Absolutely. And I find that that when people realize that they can, well, if they ever realize that they can see things from a different point of view, they lament the wasted time that they spent over things that aren't going to change. They already happened. And if you can find the silver lining in everything, then you just can live a much more productive life, because you're making that a life's lesson that you got. So you might as well take it and use it like you did. I mean, you took some, the lemons into lemonade thing, and that whole thing. And it really is, I wish they did spend a little more time in general in our just in our society, whatever,
Mhm.
helping people with the mental aspect of it. And obviously that hasn't been priority, or we wouldn't have all these mentally ill people running around now. And hopefully that'll change if they can start helping those people instead of putting them in jail. I guess.
Yeah,
It's like, okay.
yeah.
So,
There is hope, and there is a lot of benefit. There are real treasure chests of
mhm.
gifts that come out of um, really facing yourself, facing the feelings, facing the loss, and seeing at the end of all of that that there's closure, there's resolution, there's forgiveness. A lot of times is a big barrier. And out of all that comes self-love, and out of self-love comes an open heart, and out of open heart comes, you know, a lot of love instead of grief and depression.
Yeah. So how do you get people that are just stuck in their woe is me, and that's just where they live? How does one ever get to them to actually pry them to even open up to the possibility of a different existence? Is that something they have to realize on their own, or how can
Oh, no, no, that's a lot of what my work is about, is helping them um, see things differently by the questions that I ask, by the conversations that we wind up in. Um, and a lot of my clients say to me, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." And just it's amazing how much transformation can happen in the split second like that.
right?
The shift of, "Wow, I never saw it that way," and then all this healing comes out, and it doesn't necessarily even take very long.
Right. And that's why I'm doing the show too. It's like, if you can get one little tiny bit of information that totally turns your world upside down in a good way, then, it's all been worth it, because sometimes it really is just getting that little piece of information that makes all the difference in the world, and realizing that your life can change, and that your depressed state due to a grief situation can improve, and that could have been like you said, sometimes it ends up being like the turning point to something even greater, having had that relationship that no longer exists. But that's
Exactly.
life, right? Life, we're born, we die. It's just like the cycle. And having had that relationship, whether it had been a really long, fruitful one, or a very short, sweet one, right? Because sometimes it's just knowing the personality of that pet or that individual that stays with you. Like you never can get, you would never get rid of that always, like, their personality. I always find that so interesting with the pets, because we've had over the period of years, many different dogs and cats and stuff, and it's like you think of each one and they each have their own little personality.
Oh, absolutely. They're all different, and they, um, I mean, the level of communication is so great, so much greater than most people think. Um, so if you can talk to your animals and have conversations, you'd be amazed at how much they understand, and it makes all the difference in the world in terms of the relationship and the joy of that pet in living, because their animals are pets because they are relationship oriented, just like humans are relationship oriented. And so the more that you can have a relationship and really honor that relationship, the happier everybody is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something that's unique. I mean, that people animal relationship is very unique because you have the control over how they're going to end up, and what you do with children too. But then children grow up and they're their own people, and they expand their mind. It's almost like the animals, you can train them, but you can also abuse them, and they're not going to, there's, it's just some sad situations, but I'm just saying that you can make that relationship as rich or as horrible as you choose to, based
Mhm.
on how you treat them, because they're really almost a mirror of how you are. If you're loving and kind, just like they say about those dogs that are the real nasty dogs that people don't allow you to have sometimes, the pit bulls.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it really, I believe, is it's how they're trained, right? Because you can have a really loving, sweet pit bull, or you can have a very
Yes,
vicious pit bull.
right. Right. Just as true with humans, how you've been parented
Mhm.
does shape a lot of your personality and your behavior and your life choices. And that's why people go into therapy for years dealing with family of origin issues, because they recognize at some point that how they grew up affected how they are now, and they don't like how they are now. They don't like their lives. And so,
Right,
that's a core of therapy. But
right. Wow. Well, this is great. I hope people have understood, from listening to this today, and just got a little bit of better understanding about the grief process, especially where we're talking about like the animals, how the animals relate to the people, and how the people the grieve over their animals, and of course I say we already know about people grieving people, but that's a whole nother thing too. That is,
yes, I'd be happy to talk about that again another time, because
yeah.
and there are differences
Mm-hmm.
uh, in terms of the grief with a pet and the grief with a human, and pets now, because they're just beginning to be recognized as a family member, as perhaps a child, the child role with a single person, for example. Um, so human grief is a little farther along
Right.
than pet loss. But bottom line, I think one of the biggest barriers, that if people would just entertain the idea about that, facing the loss and experiencing the grief, the crying, the depression, whatever, um, they're not going to stay stuck in it. I think that's one of the fears if people that people have. If they let it in, it's going to overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to go away. It's never, it's just too much. So they put it in a box and they don't want to deal with it at all. But it's really actually the opposite. The more you deal with the feelings, whatever they are, grief, anger, depression, the more healing you have, the, the more change that
Yeah.
takes place.
And so many things in life are like that, right? It's like go into it, and then your fear of it just dissipates,
Lesson.
right?
Right.
So we fear so many things, and then if you actually, and a lot of times you do have to get pushed
Hmm.
to do that, but it's like, wow, I'm glad I did that, and with resistance, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah,
So
and that's a good example of one of the gifts and blessings of a loss,
mhm.
is that that person ends up experiencing the freedom that to experience feelings is not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing.
Yeah, that reminds me of that. There's a show that came out, and it was I can't think of the name right now, but anyway, it was the whole thing is like the deeper you have to have sadness to have joy. So if you don't allow yourself to be sad, you don't have great joy either. So there's that
Right.
whole pendulum that if you need to experience all of it to be able to appreciate any of it.
That's
It's,
right.
yeah. So all right. Well, I think we're going to need to wrap it up, but I wanted to see if you want to tell them about your website and how they can get your book and all that, just to kind of give that. We'll put it in the show notes as well, but go ahead
Great.
and just tell them. And a lot of people are probably driving or jogging or something, but
Okay.
tell them. Mhm.
Well, my website is nancygordonglobal.com. That's NANCYGORDONGLOBAL, which conveys my hope that I reach the whole world. and that we're all one. My email is nancy@nancygordonglobal.com. And I'm happy to offer a 30-minute complimentary consultation to see how I might be of service or send you in a different direction. And my books are on Amazon and on my website.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nancy. This has been really great. I'm a big fan of animals, and part of this whole emergency info file, this course that I've created, so got it together now, emergency info file, has a whole section on pets are property.
Wonderful.
People don't realize how, that they have to make arrangements for them, and it just goes beyond the fact that they have this animal and all that. So I encourage people to go to the website, gotittogethernow.com, and take a look at the program. And I think that as a movement that I'm really advocating, that once you understand that you can decide to leave a stress-free legacy for your family, or you can choose not to, it's up to you. And then that impacts their life once you're no longer here to actually see the joy that you've created, and then also the chaos that you might have left, where families don't speak to each other and there's lawsuits going on and probate court and all that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely not. It's not that difficult.
And in fact, I think a lot of people will realize once they do, start the process of identifying what's going to happen with their pet, that they'll actually feel some relief. It might be easier for them to leave and to pass if they know that their loved animal is going to be taken care of. So that's another way to, change the mindset.
Right. That's right. So if you know people who, obviously not everybody's listening to the podcast, but if you know people that do have pets and you're like, you can broach the subject, say, hey, you should listen to this podcast. I heard. That's how you have to start conversations with a lot of this particular kind of topic. It's like, I heard this thing and I think it's going to, help me. Maybe you should take a look at it as well, because it really is like a human thing, like humanly possible to make this better for the people left behind. So like humans should maybe take a look at it.
Yes. And what a gift, what a loving gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be remembered by.
Absolutely. Well, that's my motivation. People remember me in a good way. So I'm going to sign off now. Just remember to tune in, rate and like and tell your friends about us and all that. And this is Stacey Golden-Lisnock. I'm your financial advocate, and signing off until our next podcast. So have a good day and take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy Therapy Podcast. If we hit it out of the park today and you learned at least one new thing to take action on in your own quest to planning the best legacy possible, then be sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and rate and review wherever you get your podcast. The show notes will provide the sites and information that were discussed today. You can get more great tips, resources, and inspiration by visiting our website, legacytherapypodcast.com.